appreciate the love all of you had for our dad and the support you show us by coming out this afternoon. Tell you a few things about him. This guy on the front of the program and the man and woman on the inside, I didn't know him. Knew the guy on the third and fourth pages a little better. The guy on the wall over here even better still. But my dad never said anything. My mom once said, and she said it gracefully and without maybe even knowing what was that I understood. We were very surprised to hear Michael was coming along. You know, it's funny because until 5 years ago, 5 years in October, when my dad turned 94 and I turned 47, I had never even been with him. I hadn't been with him for even half of his life at that point. And so I really did know the older dad. And of course, in the years since then, I've been steadily with him for more than half of his life. In fact, I think maybe the last 6 months when he was failing faster and faster, he was a little worried I was going to catch up. But I tell you that in fun and also to tell you that I, you know, as a kid, as David Church here somewhere, he'll tell you, even when I was in college, I wasn't really paying much attention. So I got to see my dad anew as somebody who was more than a dad, really for the first time. I had him in class, and he was a great teacher, as many of you know. But some years later, as an adult, after we'd become friends as adults, I saw him do a funeral, and I looked over at my siblings and said, "Oh man, he's good." And he was. And there was something about funerals that were special for him because he had some insight in some way, and I really can't articulate it, I don't think, the way I'd like to. But we committed him to the earth this morning, and he really should be the one here now running this thing. So, but he did have a connection and was extra good at funerals, and insofar as he was good at everything. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit because it's probably not something that many of you knew. But he was in touch. I can't find the right word. In touch isn't the right word. With what he would have called the human condition, or sometimes the eternal pity, with the fact of a fallen world in which there's suffering, sin, and death. We all know that, and we all don't like it, but he had a special distaste, disgust for the conditions here, and really was able to connect to them in the funeral service. But it was consistent with something in his outlook. It was a visceral thing he felt. Sometimes, you know, we all know people, sometimes there's just the joyful, and of course, you know Dad, he was fun and had a good time too, but he had some kind of connection to the pain of this life. The words I wrote down here in my notes is he was mindful of it all the time, and it bothered him very much. I don't know why that was, and I should make clear, you know, he didn't walk around depressed, not coming out of the room, but you could tell it was in his side. You know, maybe it came from his family, I don't know. And Jonathan, I'm not talking about just you, I'm talking about the rest of you too. But, you know, when we published his obituary, there was a lot of material about his military service that was in there. And I can't tell you, I got more than a handful of calls saying, I knew your dad was great, but I didn't know about this military service. And yeah, he was, you know, part of the invasion force of Germany as a chaplain. But I'm maybe telling some more of you something you didn't know with some of what I'm going to tell you. When he was about 5, his mother died. And he was left with father who owned a business and was essentially for the next few years until his father got remarried, raised by older sisters. But I remember him telling me one day about just having stuck in his mind as a 5-year-old, undertaker coming and carrying his mom out of her bedroom down the stairs. And of course, in those days, your wake was held in your living room. And so after he watched her being carried down the stairs, he watched her lie motionless in his living room for the next 2 or 3 days. Of course, that was in the early 1920s and thereabout, was the Great Depression. His family did fine, his father's business stayed intact and worked, but I'm sure he saw people all around him who were suffering and in pain. Of course, then he goes off as a younger man to war and came upon in the liberation forces at least 2 concentration camps, and together with that and the actual conduct of battle, must have seen some horrible things. When they were young parents, my sister Ruth, one of the last group of people, she was 2 years old, so one of the last group of people in the country to get polio, just as the vaccine was coming out. And many of you know, my beautiful, healthy 15-year-old daughter, Erin, when she was 6, she was diagnosed with cancer, and we spent 2 years in the hospital, not 2 years admitted, but over the course of 2 years of chemotherapy, hospitalizations again and again. And it was horrible, but of course we got to go in with her and comfort her when they were poking her with needles and that kind of thing, and stay, or the hospital even gave us a bed to sleep in overnight. But in Dad's case, and Mom and Dad's case, when Ruth got sick, they did things differently. And when she was in rehab for treatment for polio for months, up at what's now Helen Hayes, I think, in North Rockland, they said visiting 2 hours on the weekend. And for weeks on end, these people had to be apart from their 2-year-old daughter who was undergoing who knows what up the street. The point is, he was in touch with actual suffering. And maybe that's where he got his special sense of it. I don't know, but he had it. He had it, and it affected, I mean, as a family, we laugh at some of his idiosyncrasies that came as a result of, you know, a good thing, the compassion, the empathy, the awareness. But when you are constantly aware of your fleeting time on the earth and of the fact that tragedy can befall you, you are also the insurance salesman's best friend. And he was that. You also prepare for the worst. And so I stand here today to tell you that he wrote his own obituary. That obituary that was published, he wrote. We maybe added a line or two. But he wrote that. And he gave very strict instructions to me that there are to be no eulogies at his funeral. So, to make one comment on the first, with the obituary, I'm going to tell a joke, just as my final illustration of where he was on these things. I'm going to tell a joke that my siblings will maybe laugh at if they don't think I'm as funny as I am. but it will illustrate for the rest of you kind of the point of what I'm saying. Like I said, he wrote his own obituary. And when he first wrote his own obituary out, a few years later, he decided maybe to make some changes, whether through experience or what. And then a couple years later, he was forced to make some changes because Debbie was born. And I don't know where he was going with the eulogy, but nobody can really say, when you conduct my funeral, make sure it has nothing to do with me. But that seems to be what he wanted to say, whether it was out of humility or in my mind, frankly, the fact that, as Pastor Irvin said earlier at the committal, there's too much to say to make it worthwhile. So we've honored his, I say honored, it's a little bit of a stretch, but we're kind of trying a little bit to honor his no eulogies thing. But if Dr. Scales gets up and happens to say something, or if I have something, and Provost David Turk, who now holds the job that Dad held for 20 years nearly here, if he, I don't know, maybe mention a thing or two, I can't control that really. It doesn't work for me. So, and then my brother will also thank you all for coming at the end, and you know, if he makes some observations, he doesn't work for me either. So, but without that, without the eulogy and the formality, we have wanted to put together, and because of what I've just told you about my dear dad, we wanted to put together a service of singing and scripture that not only takes account of the blessed hope. His thing with funerals, you know, he recognized that we don't mourn as other people do as Christians, but he said we do mourn. And he would even go in his, we have a file of funerals that he did, and he would go into the vacuity of the other and false religions that had no answer, had no hope. And he made sure he went into that, and he made sure he went into the hope, but he was also very in touch with the mourning and sadness. And so we've pulled out a few verses for reading and a few songs for singing that will both observe and lament the human condition, or as he said, as long as I have known him, at least in the second half of his life, this vale of tears. But also be reminded of that blessed hope that we have. So I will say one other thing. He had in all his funerals his kicker line, apparently from reading many of the notes, was using a Tozer line about how in the old days when the Israelites would come and set their eyes upon the temple for the first time, they had heard of its glory, but they had never seen it. And when they rounded the last bend down from the Mount of Olives and laid their eyes upon it, that was a beautiful thing. It was an illustration of seeing the Lord, of course, and the beauty that we don't expect. I'm gonna close my remarks on one little bit different thing, and that is that he had gags with many of you that he would go over again and again. And one of the ones that was it was in his arsenal for a long time, but he and I in the past few years at least used it constantly to say goodbye to one another. And he would tell me, I'll meet you at the corner of whatever, and if you get there first, make an X in the sidewalk with chalk. And if I get there first, I'll rub it out. So I am sure that he is with the Lord, rubbing out the X that is waiting for him. Amen.
toils and snares.